We were approached by to my student who kind of like came up with this idea, who works for startups and so on, and he because it was 100 years since the word robot was invented by a Czech playwright Karl Čapek. So he had an idea that now the technology is far enough to have robots to write play about the playwright, uh, which was a, a nice idea, but it didn't. Well, the technology is still not there because we worked with the GPT language model, which I don't know if you know it, but it basically works like a very next level of what Google already does for us, that you start to write a sentence and it's kind of finishes for you. So it's like this, but it generates the whole text, whole page, for instance. But the thing is that because it's something that comes from the literature, it works more with the word associations. So, but for the theater play, even though they changed the way the text generates, that we would put just input the first description and two lines of dialogue, and then it would generate dialogue. But the problem is that the drama itself is the dialogue is not the main structure. The main structure is the situation, something that happens behind the words, and something that the technology definitely lacks is the perception of the real world, and also the the fantasy the image fantasy. So it creates words, it creates language, it doesn't create like images. So that's the first obstacle. So instead of like writing the well-made play, so we decided to have just scenes, individual scenes with only two characters, because the thing is that also, since the computer have no clear idea what's happening, so his characters are very often schizophrenic, that they are not individuals. Those are individual lines, but then, for example, because I wanted to keep the sci-fi element there, so I always generate like dialogue of a robot with another person, and throughout the dialogue, very often the robot would forget he's a robot, and the person, because the person would start to act like a robot, and so on. So we kind of settled down for easier task, which was to have individual scenes that kind of confronts the character of the robot with something very human, which is emotions. And so I generated like loads of those scenes, and then picked 8 of them to kind of create a storyline of that. But it works. The show itself works more like a mm, like anthology of short stories with one character. So that's the first thing. But I must say that so far the technology is good as a tool that helps you to think outside of the box, as you said, because it has no idea whatsoever how the real world looks like. So sometimes, because you know that when you write, and the more you see, the more you live, that it's harder to quit this realistic thinking. Sometimes I feel like it was easier for me to, because I'm a playwright too, that it was easier for me to write before I knew more about theater. And the more I know, then it's worse to kind of think outside of the box. And this way it works, but it has its limits, that the text that is generated by the robot will never be like psychological realistic so far, but it has its I mean, because now there's a new model of the GPT language model, which is more perfect, that it really can simulate how people write. But I must say that I've seen some of the things that were generated there that to me then it lacks the originality, because what it now seems like a mistakes of the robot is actually something that's original, that it's not just the epigonic writing, like that someone who would be a copycat, and that's kind of adds to it, because I forgot to mention that at the beginning we had to let the robot read all the plays that were available, like from the perception of the performing rights. So they are usually like the text, they are a bit older, because there's no precedence regarding the rights to think like that, because obviously it's a data system, so the computer learns by making an algorithm based on what he reads before. So we had to work with a certain sources, and now I think that's one interesting question as well about how is it with performance rights for something like that, because it works with knowledge of other plays. But I think when you read it, it never uses like a whole sentences of other plays. It just like learns by it. So basically it's like calling me copycat because I've been in theater before I read my own play, and it's very hard to tell what is something that comes from my like experience as a theater goer, and what is something that it's there in my consciousness. And so it's always very hard to speak about the originality when it comes to that, because you would have to live in a cage to be completely original with no knowledge of what was written before you.
With the machine.
Well, I would say that, you know, when you are working with a real playwright, living playwright, then you kind of like set yourself a certain goal, and you have the quality approach, which means that you have one version, and then you trying to like create more depth to it to make it more perfect by giving the playwright a feedback. And it's like it's the quality approach. With the computer it was a quantity approach, that I generated as much text as possible, and I chose the ones that were the most accessible for the theater. So that's what I meant, that I had like, I don't know, like 80 scenes, and I took 8 of them.
Okay.
Because they were the most suitable for us. Because we had the goal that the question was, is a robot able to write a play? So I didn't want to change in the scenes much, because that wasn't the goal to make a perfect play. It was to make a play that is as much as possible written by the computer, the stages, and then think about if this could be the something that could enrich the theater writing. So of course there are now my students are working with it as well, but they created an approach that they're generating the text like sentence by sentence, and they always choose if it's good or not. But then I think there's even more impact of a living person than the robot. It's just like it's basically like trying to compose a text from like a newspaper words and you just like pick it and put it together. So that's not the right approach. So I tried to like choose the scenes out of many, but also without like possible not so many changes from my part.
Right. So you were trying to keep the intervention from your side to a minimum.
Yeah.
So there was
but
more
also
of the
I've learned
machine's
working
voice.
with it that yeah. But you know, when you work with it, you start to learn yourself as well. What is the like best input for the computer? That I've learned soon that it's that the less like realistic my input is, the better, because the computer can't keep up with it. So I soon started to use the perception of the computer as an advantage. That I would start, for example, like with the scene where there's a robot alone on the street, afraid, in the dark, and there's a stranger approaching him, asking him that, telling him that all the robots should be already plugged in their beds now. So it's these sci-fi elements when they should be there, and then actually it worked because it has its own logic, the scenes. But when I just started the realistic thing that someone who came home and did you like make the groceries, then they would start to think about like very absurd things that are not up to the realistic beginning. So I kind of sat down for the sci-fi or fantasy perception of the world. So it has its own standards. Anyway. Well, I had nothing but the opposition to it, because the thing is that it was a project that was offered to our theater and it was interesting for us. But for me, as an individual, I was a bit opposed by it, like even appalled, because you know there's. Because I'm a playwright and I don't want a robot to steal my work. But at the same time, I started to think about it differently. That uh, I shouldn't like think that simplistic about it. That there's no like walking creature here that would have an electronic brain. It's something that could be a tool to us. And also, the more I worked with it, the less I was scared that the robot would take over my work. Because what you mentioned before yourself as well, when I write something as a playwright, there's something behind it. There's some goal. There's some theme. There's something that I have my urges to push me to write, while the robot has us to push it to write. So as you said, if you read it, you can interpret it like actually endless ways, because you don't feel that there's the message behind it, that there's a inner need of the playwright to tell something through the writing. And that's actually something, well, the actors, when we work with them, said that the text lacks soul to them. I, as a playwright or dramaturg, I call it that it lacks the theme or the message, but they really felt like that there's no soul. Because even if you like read absurd play, it doesn't make sense in certain parts, but there's a one like message that speaks through it. Here, if you would take any certain part of the text, you could interpret it different ways, and it just doesn't click together. So you have to. I think that in the end, when you're putting the show, that there is a huge impact of person while directing anyway, because he's the one who decides the interpretation. Even though we tried to not to like change things and stuff, so still it's a person who the actors have to make a choice for their character. They have, while the robot doesn't make the choice for them. So, and also there's no, I mean, there's, as we spoke about, that it's thinking outside of a box. That's an advantage, but the other disadvantage is there's no thinking, there's no box or something that would like bind it together whatsoever. Well, what I, because I think that it's a tool for a certain like part where it can like offer you interesting direction, but at the same time what is very horrifying about it is not that we learn about the robot through it, but about ourselves, because you know because it kind of read all the data before that, it always offered me some kind of violence of, or you know, or whatever characters I put together, it would end up either with violence or with sex, which like speaks about us. Because even though if the robot like wrote a classic drama, sci-fi, absurd thing, romantic stuff, it would there. Those are the motives or themes that are always there. So he kind of leaned to it. So we even had to change the program there to change the probability of the intimation between the characters. It was all the time. It was very inappropriate. It still is to a certain point. The play you can, well, from today's standard, the text is very like chauvinist and sexistic, you know, because it had all the stuff even from past with no corrections. So on one hand, it's interesting and it's good to see the writing when there are no like social standards, but at the same time, it really reveals the worst of humanity. When it's a play I wrote or like the living playwright, then you usually need actors to understand the bigger picture, to understand their character, so they can then kind of uh, exist freely according to situations for their character. And when they understand the character, that then it's that's the start of the success of their work. And of course, then you work with them with a certain situation. But here, there was no bigger picture. There was no character, and the characters were incoherent. This makes sense. Like that they weren't very cohesive. That
sure,
they would act different in like not even in the same situation. They would have 10 different faces, kind of. But also, as I said before, we didn't want to manipulate the text, so we uh, had to work a different approach, that we would uh, work with the actors the way, so they don't lie for the character, so they speak the truth for the character in each moment, you know, so they keep the changes of the characters, but they couldn't think about it about a certain arch, but about the mosaic that creates one character. So in every moment, every aspect, because in a normal play, you never trust the words that are said out loud. You always think about what's behind it. But here we kind of chose the approach that you have to like, in a way, it's like having characters on Spectre. They only say things that they mean. So that there's no manipulation behind, there's no tactics. There's just whatever you say out loud is something you strongly believe. So it was a different approach like that. Because like as you said, the writing of the robots, like writing of a of a baby of a child, because he is pure, so he wouldn't think that he has to hide something. He just says what he has on mind. I have this like experience with people that are on spectrum. They just say everything even though you don't like it, and that's something very pure about it. And we kind of I even let the actors like watch the, I don't know if you're familiar with the Netflix show The Love on Spectre, and
No, haven't
which
seen
is
it.
like it shows like people on Spectre like dating each other. It's actually a very sweet show, but for them to understand what it's like not to cover your inner thoughts. So we work with it in this way, because there was nothing behind the characters, like from the playwright's point. So we didn't want to pretend that there is something behind, because also it would be very hard for the actors as well, because if I claimed that this is the goal of the character, there would be 20 moments in the text that wouldn't make sense towards that goal. Well, actually, the developing the play itself was around 2 to 3 months,
Okay.
which is a kind of a normal time that a living playwright has. But as I said, it was a different kind of because everyone would think that if it's a computer generating the text, that it's much quicker. But
Yeah.
as I said before, it's working with quantity, so it doesn't make it any faster. Because I always say that the main difference is when you have a first draft from the living playwright and you don't like it, or there's some problems, then you comment on those problems and you make it better and better. But here, if you tell the computer that you don't like the first draft, he creates another first draft. That is like, which has the same quality as the first one. So you go to many first drafts and you just have to choose the one first draft that it's okay for you. But it's never the quality work that you could really like lead a dialogue with the robot about the play. So actually, due to that, it took exact same time that if I like had it written by a living playwright. And then the rehearsing itself, we tend to rehearse for 6 weeks every play, and so we rehearse the same exact time for this play. And you mean like the script in which the part of the AI would be as much as possible, or
as much as possible? Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well then, my recommendation would be don't get frustrated, because I think that it's actually better, because in the linguistic model I was working with, we could like choose whether it generates a text uh, like up in shorter lines or the whole page. And I would actually think I would actually learn quite soon that it's better to have a like bigger amount of the text to generate it, because if you go one by one, that it stops. Very soon you think it doesn't make sense and you get frustrated because it doesn't lead anywhere. But if you have the bigger picture, sometimes even though it feels at a certain point it makes no sense, sometimes you find there's some meaning. So it's better actually to have the generated like at least one page and then read it and try to interpret it your way, and then that way you can find something that is interesting and try to generate more on that. But if you go like sentence by sentence, then it's very hard to find something that would like get you excited about it. While if you have this and like the whole page and you feel that there are some things that are, doesn't make sense, you can always like with the text, it's normal that you do some cuts, speaking with the playwright. Here you have the advantage that the playwright can't tell you that you can't make any cuts, you can do the cuts. But it's a normal editing of the text. It's not, I don't think that it would be such a huge impact of a person, because that's something you would go through the playwright as well, talking about with some unnecessary cuts. But so it's better to have the more material, and then based from what you learn from that generates more, because then you can actually explore something. But I can, from my experience, when I work with little sentences, I would get frustrated very early. And also another thing is to give it a certain time, because as I said, that usually people expect, because it's generated by a computer, that the play should be generated within a few days, because you just click the button. But also you must realize that this is much harder for you as a reader than read something that makes sense. So I think that you must realize that it's okay to work with it like 2 hours a day, and then your brain gets like this. It's better just to have a rest and work on it another day, because I think that it would be a foul thinking to think that just because the technology must be faster. Because at the end it's you who will like try to make sense out of it. So it's better to like keep your mind fresh, because I, as a playwright, I'm able to write like for 3-4 hours at one go, because it keeps my brain fresh. Then I get a bit tired. But reading this text that doesn't make any sense got me tired after an hour and a half, and I felt frustrated. But it's good to have I think realistic goals. And also I think that in the end, because I decided to had those like scenes and then put them together, that actually it created kind of a story of the character of the robot. But if I was trying from the beginning to have the story and to kind of follow where the character stopped, then I think it would be much harder. It's much better to kind of have the material and then like try to make sense of it. Because it's even like sometimes you know it probably as a director, that sometimes you get excited about this moment of the play and you need it to do it first, even though it's maybe ending, but you know that it's important for you to know what that is, so you can like use it as a base for all of your other work. So
true.
So here I think that linear thinking, working with the computer, can be very frustrating, because it doesn't think like linearly itself. But we always have a debate with audience after every show, because we kind of feel that it doesn't stands out as a play on its own. We don't think that it's that it could be compared to something else. You know, we don't think it's a standalone evening. So we always have a debate about the ethics of AI, and also about the process as well. And the actually interesting thing is that the audience very much is surprised that the play feels quite natural to them. More, and even people who read the play before, they say that that due to the actors who are like quite who can act specifically, that the language which normally when you read it is absurd, that they kind of like forget the absurdity, because you have to make some choices as an actor, and you choose which are the leading sentences which make sense for you, and then the other ones you can kind of put a cover on it by like leaving it like not to stress such a stress not to stress on it that much. So when you actually watch the show, then or that there's a lot of things that wouldn't make sense if you read it, but if you just see it, and because you don't pay such attention to those moments, that they feel like it feels more natural, like a normal play. So, but and also they kind of follow the story in it. They they just quite often comment of the certain well, that the characters don't have such depth, which makes sense. Like, and but I think that mostly they are actually surprised that they would expect something that would be more fragmental, more absurd. That they are surprised that they can actually follow the story, because they go there to see an experiment, and actually in the end they get something that is very close to conventional play. So I think that is surprising for that, because I think, as you said, that most people don't go there to see the play, but to see the experiment. And I think in a way they're sometimes disappointed that it's more coherent that they would want it to be, because then it's like scary, but also I think that the play works very well to open a wider debate, because looking at it, you start to think, okay, what else AI does in my life already, and I don't even realize it. All those like personal advertisement on internet, you don't think about it that often, but once you start to pay attention to it, it's actually rather like worrying that someone or something knows that much about you. Well, I think that the disturbing is always they don't. We tend to uh, be manipulated by all those sci-fi visions, so we kind of skip the part where we can think about it as a tool, but we always think first about something that could be our master rather than tool. So people are verifying about the extreme where there's something that would be deciding for them. So they are, which the experiment kind of shows that it's not there yet. It can work as a tool, but it's really, and also the thing that I think that what always like interests them the most is they want to know if we think that the computer has its own will, which so far it doesn't, because that's the message that lacks in the text. It has no, also it has no need to write a play. It's us who makes it write a play. So it's actually, it comes back to that we're just getting what we wanted. but and it's something that, because we don't know how it works, it's very hard to learn, to teach someone else to have this inner need. So also, I mean, it's interesting also when we had other writers there, that you can feel that they are all like appalled by the idea, as I was in the beginning. That, but at the same time, I think that the problem is just like also with the fact that I can't imagine that there would be a playwright who would freely say that I didn't write this myself. I had someone to help me with that. You know that it's because you know that it's a part of that that being an artist also brings some certain kind of ego to it, and you know, and I have that as well, that I wouldn't feel so like proud of my work if I had something helping with that. So,
Sure.
but I mean, we talked about that it would be like very good tool for those like, you know, never ending TV series where basically the dialogue already doesn't make much sense sometimes in those long soap operas, and it doesn't have much depth. Or NPC characters in computer games, you know, there are two people like standing next to your character talking something, and you know, that's something that this could be used for because they have some rules, and I can't hardly imagine that there's a writer who enjoys like when you are playing I don't know now Final Fantasy, and they're to write a dialogue of some two characters that no one will even meet in a game, but you want the world
right.
to feel like vivid. So I think that people should think about it as a tool that can help them not to do things that they don't want to do themselves.
Right.
But I mean, the thing is that what scares people the most, and we work uh, with professor who Jan Romportel, who works with ethics of AI, and he kind of scares everyone anyway because he says that it's developing like so quickly that it's unstoppable. And also, but he says that the biggest problem of that is that because no one uh, that actually the thinking of it has its strict rules, because and you never know how the task will be uh, under comprehended in a way that he always says the example that you would give a computer or AI to task like, I want the whole world to be happy, so it for it it's like, okay, so we'll just dose everyone with like happy hormones or antidepressives, so everyone is happy. So it has no ethics or morals at the point. It just wants to achieve its goal. So exactly. It's like with now writing, I will write you anything you want. I will write. I don't have my inner goal, so I'll just, you know, get to the end when I give you the page of the text, but there is nothing behind it. It's like this. That's the biggest issue now. But I think that for people it's still very much sci-fi, and you can know that. But even the journalists, when we were preparing the play, and I was doing interview, they asked me if they can if they can take a photo of me and the AI, and I explained them that there's no robot like that would look anthropoid. It's just you know, internet browser where I put the words. So and they were very disappointed about that. Well, yeah, there was it's and actually the scene is still in the play, and it was one day when I came like annoyed and I have to click again, you know, because it gets frustrated. And there was a whole like COVID situation here, and I made the put there just to kind of to amuse myself. I put there a character of an actor who goes to a job office to ask for another job because he can't act now in a theater because all the theaters are closed. And it created a beautiful and funny like a dialogue of an actor who said there was, well, the point was just that he said something about the beauty of acting, and it was quite, and I thought, oh, that's a very deep thing, and it all kind of makes sense when the clerk started to be fascinated by the actor, and it was kind of, it still was kind of realistic, but it was poetic and at the same time, or there's a scene where, like, where he's in the kind of there's a masser who massage him, and he says that your touches feel like beds of butterfly wings, and you feel like, oh, that's actually that's actually very poetic. So.
Yeah. All right, you come up with that quote. That's quite interesting.
Yeah. And also
keep talking.
Also, you could see that the computer, like, that I felt that it has different moods, because some days it was more poetic, some day I don't know what happened, if it's for something else that it's read before, but and once I even felt like it's stubborn in a way. I know it sounds like sci-fi, but there was one version of a text I didn't like at all, and so I made like put it there that I want a different version, and it kept giving me the same version again, and then I started to generate something else, and there was some motive of a stolen car, and the motive of a stolen car kind of appeared in a other scene with completely different input. So I felt like, oh, he's really stuck on the broken car now. So there were some moments when when I wanted myself, so maybe it does its own will, but